Tonight, we are excited to help kick off the 2025 South Carolina legislative session with thoughtful discussion and in-depth analysis. I want to begin by extending a heartfelt thanks to the ETV Endowment of South Carolina. I believe they're in the back of the room. Your steadfast partnership, Lee, and your generous support makes all of these events possible. The endowment plays a crucial role in helping us deliver high-quality programming to the people of South Carolina. And we could not do this without you all. So we are grateful and we thank you for the partnership that you have with us. To our loyal members and our supporters in attendance tonight, your commitment to SCETV and South Carolina Public Radio allows us to continue delivering content that is critical to understanding and engaging with the challenges and opportunities that we face as South Carolinians. So we thank you. We thank each and every one of you. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you to my amazing team here at South Carolina ETV. They made tonight's event possible, and they are helping inform South Carolinians through the South Carolina Lead and This Week in South Carolina, from the communications team to the productions team, to Amy and Gavin and AT and Sean and Maayan. You all make all of these types of events possible, and it's hard work behind the scenes, and even though you come out front and you make it look so easy and seamless, we are grateful and we are appreciative for it. The South Carolina Lead podcast is an important part of SCETV's efforts to keep you informed. Each week, we dive into the people, issues, and events shaping South Carolina politics. Additionally, This Week in South Carolina brings you in-depth discussions with political leaders and policymakers to explore the most pressing issues facing our state. Tonight's conversation will be part of an upcoming episode of This Week in South Carolina, so be sure to tune in. I'd also like to highlight the role SCETV plays in keeping South Carolinians informed about the work being done at the State House. SCETV provides live coverage of the South Carolina House of Representatives and Senate when they're in session, as well as key committee meetings, public hearings, and press conferences. I think I saw Karen Hearing in the back. She sits through all of those meetings and those hearings, and she diligently watches and makes sure that that information is streamed out to the public of South Carolina. And so, Karen, we thank you for that. These resources allow citizens to stay informed and engaged with the legislative process wherever they are. Tonight, we are honored to have a special guest on the SC Lead and This Week in South Carolina, Speaker of the South Carolina House of Representatives, Murrell Smith, who you see seated on the platform. The Honorable G. Murrell Smith, Jr., Speaker of the South Carolina House of Representatives, is an attorney and a lifelong South Carolinian. He is a native of Florence who grew up in Sumter. The Honorable Smith graduated from Wofford College with a degree in history and government, and he earned his Juris Doctorate from the University of South Carolina School of Law. Go Gamecocks. Elected in 2000 to represent District 67, he has served in several leadership roles, including chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, before becoming the 61st Speaker in 2022. In addition to his legislative duties, the Honorable Smith is a partner at Smith Robinson Law Firm and remains active in his Sumter community, where he lives with his wife of 20 years, Macaulay, and their two children, Mary Brown, B., and George Murrell III. Once again, I want to thank you all for being here. We're grateful for your support, and we hope that you enjoy tonight's live taping of the South Carolina Lead and This Week in South Carolina. Now, I'll turn it over to our host, Gavin Jackson.
Thank you, Adrian. Yeah. So like Adrian said, we're going to be taping this live, so feel free to clap along. We're going to do an introduction in a moment. We're streaming on YouTube as well, but this episode will air next Friday on ETV and on YouTube. But of course, this will be Saturday's podcast. I have to do the crossover. It's very tricky. So we're going to time this out for about 23 minutes or so with this conversation with the speaker. And Speaker Smith, we're so excited for you to be here for us, for this conversation that will start in a moment, especially since it's been a long day of me talking to other members of leadership too. So the perfect way to end this day here talking with you about this. And we'll get started in a minute. AT's going to cue me with the music, and we'll go ahead and get rolling. Yeah, I think we're good. Welcome to the South Carolina Lead and This Week in South Carolina crossover episode for 2025. That's right, I'm Gavin Jackson here at SC TV Studios in Columbia. We have a great live audience with us. Hello, audience. That's right, we're previewing the 2025 legislative session, and to do that, I'm joined on stage with South Carolina Public Radio's Maayan Schechter and our special guest, House Speaker Murrell Smith. Speaker Smith, welcome. Welcome to you all again as well. Thank you.
Glad to be here.
So, Speaker Smith, let's just kick this off. We got about 20 minutes to talk to you, and this is a privilege for us. But we want to ask you just really simply to give people an overview of basically what your job entails as Speaker. I mean, you have to corral a whole chamber of folks. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. Give us a little overview of what you have to do and how you keep things moving.
Yeah, well, first, let me say it's an honor to serve the citizens of South Carolina in that position. I'm obviously a representative. I'm elected from District 67 in Sumter County. And I had the pleasure of being elected as Speaker in 2022. Finished a little bit of the term in 2022 when the former Speaker resigned, and then started my own term thereafter. But the Speaker is a unique position in South Carolina. And I can tell you what I always tell people is the one thing that I've learned quickly about that is I gained 123 new constituents, and they are a whole lot more needy than my constituents back in Sumter County. And so you obviously have to deal with members, and it's the House is obviously you've got employees and people who staff committees and work in the operations of the House, and the Speaker is the head of the operations of the House, which are delegated to the clerk and a number of others to handle. And then I have to preside over the chamber. Have to wear a purple robe every once in a while. I don't look real good in purple, and then also make committee assignments, and that's probably one of the most important things. And then every piece of legislation that is introduced is I have to assign it to a standing committee and determine what standing committee would have jurisdiction over that and do that. And then, we also have to deal with some HR issues every once in a while. Fortunately, it's not the members so far in my tenure, and hopefully it'll stay that way. But it's a lot of responsibility. But at the end of the day, it's an honor. And what you heard Adrian mention in the beginning is I'm the 61st person that has been Speaker of the South Carolina House of Representatives since we became a state. Mm-hmm. And that's you think about that. That's an honor to be one of 61 people who served. And I always want to make sure that the institution is served with honor and integrity, and that's one issue that I've really tried to make sure of, that we are really concentrating on maintaining the integrity and the decorum in our institution.
Mr. Speaker, we're at the start of the first year of a two-year session. You've got a lot of priorities this year. We'll dive deeper into them, but could you just give us quick 1 to 2 sentences, if it works, of what your top priorities are for this legislative session?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, Hurricane Helene we're going to have to work on making sure that we fund that appropriately. That upstate, especially in some of the western areas, were devastated by that. Probably some of the worst damage that they've seen in the history of the state. And so we got to make sure that we repair that immediately. And obviously there's a FEMA match, and I think we're trying to work through that. The good news is that at the end of the year, Congress passed a relief bill, and we're trying to dissect that right now, determine how much money is going to come from there. But first and foremost, we need to clean up and repair ourselves from Helene. Number two, another issue, and I've talked about a lot, and we'll talk about it in more detail, I presume, but I think tax relief is a big issue. South Carolina has the highest income tax rate not in the country, but in the Southeast, and one of the highest in the country. And we can talk about low tax state. We are a low tax state, and that's something I'm very proud of. But when you look at when we're competing with our neighbors, and we're competing with people all over the country for jobs and industries and employers to come and move here. And when they Google South Carolina, and you see that it's 6%, 6.2% tax income rate, and North Carolina is now at 4.45%, moving to 3.99. Georgia similarly is moving below 5%. It's time for us to be competitive with our neighbors, because our neighbors are who we're competing with for jobs and for industries in this southeast region recently.
And Speaker, when we're talking about what state economists are forecasting for budget growth, they're projecting strong revenue growth in one-time dollars, while also acknowledging that the revenue is about to stabilize, and we're coming off that sugar high from all those big spending bills from COVID-19 and such from the federal government. But how does this shape your approach to where you think the budget should go? Obviously, you're not over the budget, but in some ways you are in some ways. So how do you see where revenues are going affecting the budget this year?
Well, I think the revenues are continuing to increase. We have $540 million of new recurring money out of a $14 billion budget. And other states right now are really having to make cuts in their budgets. Their revenue is really trailing off, and some states are in the negative. And South Carolina, fortunately, is not that right now. We have continued to see growth. We have continued to see jobs. We continue to see revenue. And that is because of our economy. And our economy is something that has really been resilient. But we're fortunate and unfortunate in the same term of having a lot of people are moving here and locating their businesses here, and that's great. And as long as people are continuing to move here and job creation is still occurring here, that I think we have a promising future. But with that is going to be more infrastructure, more things that we're going to have to deal with as we are a growing state.
You talked about the income tax rate cut. What rate would make you happy? What would you like to see the legislature do this year? And on top of that, some Senate leaders have said that they'd like to see a more holistic approach. Now, what is included in that holistic approach remains to be seen. Do you think that there is an appetite to look at everything as well?
I think there's an absolute appetite to look at everything as well. And we've done that in the past. And what you find is that when you weight it down with a holistic approach, then it really dies under its own weight at some point, because it accumulates more people who are opposed to it. That's why what we're looking at is going just to the income tax right now. We need to have an overhaul of our entire tax system. It's antiquated. It's time for us to reform that. But right now, we need to look at the income tax, because it's a competitiveness issue for us. And what I would like to do, I would like for it to be at zero. I don't think we have to tax income. But right now, we need to be competitive with our neighbors, and that means less than our neighbors' tax rate. So I would look in the 3 to 4% range, start with having triggers like every other state's doing, and bringing it down eventually to zero.
So multi-phase?
Yes.
Gotcha.
I was going to say, because we've seen holistic approaches to reducing taxes and analyzing taxes in the past, and it doesn't seem like it ever really goes anywhere. What do you think the speed bumps are, and do you think everyone's on the same page now to actually make some movements on that?
Well, I think everybody agrees we need to lower our tax rate. The devil's in the detail, and we have been working on this for a couple months now, and it is not an easy task. There are a lot of road bumps, speed bumps in the road, as you say, and we're trying to work through that. And the goal is to flatten the tax and not have a progressive income tax, but have one flat rate. And you have to broaden the base. Right now, 42% of South Carolinians do not pay income taxes. And that's because we're on this federal taxable income. You start off at federal taxable income instead of your AGI, and the federal government then basically dictates tax policy to us, to which we have to follow. And so I think we really need to make that switch to adjusted gross income, and we need to continue to push down that rate.
But then, Speaker Smith, when we talk about that, and we change the tax structure here, and we change how money gets into the budget, are there any concerns that we're already not funding enough of the state agencies to what they need? How do you make up that shortfall?
You take this out of growth. And we've had good growth over the years, and you put these triggers in when you can afford it, when you have in years like currently we are at 6.2%, and we to go down if we have revenue growth of more than 5%. And so that lets you still be able to fund government and be able to reduce taxes.
Another big issue that we're going to see this year is obviously the debate over school choice expansion, which y'all already had this year, but the Supreme Court ruled unconstitutional. The Senate has started sort of a miniature debate. They say it's going to be the first thing out the gate this year, but they want to pay for these private school vouchers using state lottery dollars. Is that something the House is going to agree with, you think?
I think the House is going to analyze anything that can move the issue forward for education savings accounts and for choice. I think, obviously, our body has been very strong advocates for school choice. And whether the lottery revenue is a sustainable mechanism moving forward, I have some concerns about that. But at the end of the day, my biggest concern right now is we have families and 5,000 children that are now enrolled in school and all of a sudden had the rug pulled out from under them by the Supreme Court, and now they have in the middle of their educational year with their children have to make a choice. Can we leave them in private school, or do we have to remove them and put them in a new school mid-school year? And so I think the lottery may be a way for us to plug a short-term gap, but long-term lottery revenues are continuing to taper off because of the high from COVID, and not everybody's buying lottery tickets anymore. And so so I think we need to be careful about that, because we've made certain commitments to the colleges and to the schools and to the technical schools, which are very critical for the success of our state.
But likely any bill that winds up passing and the governor signs into law will have to probably go back before the state Supreme Court. So anything that y'all plan to pass would probably pass this year?
Yes, I think so. And the Senate is taking the lead, which is fine with us in the House, and we've had discussions with them, and we'll be ready when they send it to us to act quickly.
Speaker Smith, talk to us about energy reform and utilities and the need for this growing demand for energy in the state. Obviously, we've been seeing a lot of growth with advanced manufacturing in the state, data centers moving here. We saw the governor earlier today. He was talking about the South Carolina Economic Developers Summit. He even mentioned coal being a solution to help feed this demand. I don't think that's going to happen after what we've seen so many of these plants go offline, but there's talk about bringing VC Summer back, that $9 billion boondoggle. I mean, that's something that we're seeing up in with 3 Mile Island when Microsoft is talking about bringing that reactor coming back online. So walk us through the situation here of this demand for energy in the state and where we are right now and the need for more of it.
Well, right now, we're at a critical juncture of almost not being able to service the energy needs of South Carolina. And like you mentioned, we've done a great job of recruiting industry, but they are high-end users of power. And when you're growing a population as well, there's more demand for power. So, we'll see how it works out for us over this next few days. We're going to be in the 20s for a sustainable period of time. If the sun doesn't come out, we're going to have some problems.
North could be like the state of Texas, I mean, hopefully.
So I hope we don't have rolling blackouts. But people don't understand how critical this issue is right now. And we are having to buy power from Georgia and from North Carolina. And that is not what we need. We need to be self-sufficient. And so, I'm not here to say there's one magic bullet or a silver bullet that's going to solve the problems, but we need to invest in anything that creates energy. I'm an all above approach with that, and so I think that's what we need to do. Georgia it cost them a lot of money, but they completed their Vogtle nuclear reactors, who had the same problem we had with their contractors, and they're looking to start up 2 to 4 more of those and to help keep up with the demand in Georgia. And so I really hope we take a hard look at restarting these nuclear reactors. I would like to see that with it not putting the taxpayers or the ratepayers at risk. There are, you mentioned Microsoft. There are a lot of private investors who would want to do that and assume that risk. There's money at the Department of Energy for loans to try to restart nuclear right now. So I think that we need to take a measured approach to everything, and we need to incentivize and create more generation. And we also need to make that come online much quicker. We have a burdensome regulatory environment. We need to reform that. That's going to be reformed at the federal level with the new administration coming in, and we need to do our part to make sure we can do that in South Carolina.
And we saw the Senate dealing with a lot of those meetings in the off session since you guys tried to get that bill through. Last year was a heavy bill. It's a big bill they have to read through. But why is this so incumbent upon the legislature to do something? Why isn't this just something that we can leave up to the private industry to take care of?
Well, South Carolina is, per our Constitution, is the one that regulates utilities, and we grant service areas to the utilities. So we are basically in charge of the power system in South Carolina, and we delegate that authority down to the Public Service Commission, and then we grant service areas, and then we also have the electric cooperatives, which are created by statute. So we need to be setting the policy for South Carolina, and for that to be carried out by those that we delegate those responsibilities to.
Another issue that you've had as even like a personal priority passion to get through that did not survive this past year, I want to mention, is a bill that got very close to the governor's desk, as you know, that would have consolidated the 6 state public health agencies into one office. And that bill died due to a procedural move by the Hardline House Freedom Caucus. A similar bill has been filed this year. Do you see that going through? Will we have a consolidation law signed by the governor this year?
Well, I hope we have a consolidation law, because for those who oppose consolidation, that is probably one of the most fractured healthcare delivery systems that we have in the country. And I can't tell you the number of times that you have dual diagnosis. You have people who have disability and special needs services, and some who have mental health services, and they overlap, or even with Department of Social Services to some degree. And what happens is when they need treatment, it is the finger pointing. Well, that's really not our job, it's their job. And so not having a system that it can deliver for the needs of the citizens of the state only harms the citizens. It doesn't harm the legislators or the government, it harms people who need health care. And so I'm very passionate about that. We got caught up into a bumper sticker politic name of Health Czar, and we were creating powers and from all the COVID that we had. And I don't think anybody in the General Assembly wants to create someone that can lock down South Carolina, or that can mandate vaccines and things to that effect. But at the end of the day, that was a very small part of it, and I do think that there's a push in the Senate and a will in the Senate to consolidate, and there's a will for us to consolidate. We would like to stay out of having this debate all over again about mandates and vaccines and things to that effect. There's a medical freedom bill that was working its way through the Senate, and we'll probably be dealing with that at some point, but we need to segregate those two issues. We need to make sure we consolidate and provide the best health delivery service that we can in this state, and then we can deal with the medical freedom on another bill. So we'll see what happens there and what it looks like. The governor now is advocating that we just give him the appointments, and he'll do that, and certainly we'll try to consider that, but I think ideally we would like to consolidate.
Speaker Smith, we have about 5 minutes left. We have a couple more questions, but I want to follow up a little bit about that when we're talking about that bill and how that got objected to. And we're talking about the House Freedom Caucus. You're talking about 124 people, including you in the House chamber. A lot of personalities, a lot of divisions in some respects. You guys do have a supermajority as Republicans, but there's about 17 members of the far-right House Freedom Caucus. You were challenged for your speakership. You obviously got reelected easily, but I want to ask you if there's some similarities there, because I feel like we're always talking about differences, but where are there similarities? Where can you guys work on things, whether it's closed primaries, reducing taxes, ending joint and several liability, the sexiest topic that we could talk about. But is there common ground, and how do you navigate that?
There is common ground, and they have a new chairman this year, and he is a policy guy, and he is, I think, committed to trying to make South Carolina better. And I've had discussions with him, and we're trying to find common ground with him and his caucus, as we are with every other caucus. We got families caucuses, we got Democrat caucuses, and we're trying to. The thing that I like about South Carolina is we're not Congress. We don't hate each other, and we don't say let political divisions and ideology separate our friendship. And, you know, we know each other, it's a small state, and so I want to make sure that, you know, I try to govern by collaboration, and that's I'll work with anybody who wants to work to make South Carolina better and who wants to be reasonable. And I think that hopefully we'll have a chance to kind of put the gamesmanship down and the rhetoric and let's concentrate on policy.
And I want to follow up with that by looking into Washington too, where you have the trifecta for Republicans. You have the House, the Senate, now you have the White House. You supported President-elect Donald Trump and throughout the primary process. You're up in New Hampshire with him. You're close with him. We have a lot of other folks who are close with him in the state too. You also have Senator Lindsey Graham, who's over the Budget Committee. Senator Tim Scott's over the Banking Committee. A lot going for South Carolina. So how important is this relationship going to be with Washington for the next couple of years?
Oh, I think it's critical, and I'm so excited about the new administration coming in, because what we're going to have, first and foremost, all the lawsuits in South Carolina suing the federal government will probably stop, so they'll save us some money on legal bills. But also, I mean, you think that what they're going to do is states are the best incubators for good ideas, in my opinion. And I think that what I understand is that they are going to return some of the power back to the states and let the states dictate the policy, not send money with policy and with conditions, but continue the money that comes in here, and don't worry about dictating how you spend it, where you spend it, and what programs you have to implement to spend it. Let you all make the decisions what's best for South Carolina, because what's best for South Carolina is not going to work in California and in any other state. So I think we've got a golden opportunity here for the next 2 years to work with the administration, to work with our senators and our House of Representatives, and to try to make sure that we do what's right for South Carolina.
We have about 2 minutes left here, so I want to ask you just really quickly some top priorities that we could see maybe immediately moving out of the House. Obviously, we're talking about education in the Senate. What could we see moving quickly out of the House?
I think you'll see energy come up first, and we passed that bill overwhelmingly last year and got pretty much the same body, and so I would expect that we'd be able to have a similar vote. So I think that's going to be the first bill that you'll see on the floor. And you know, as you know, we have with session and starting a new session, the work's going to happen in the first few weeks in committee, so we get the bills to the floor. So I think that's going to be the first bill that you'll see on the floor.
Mm-hmm. And then also just getting a focus on infrastructure as well, and that's going to be all through the budget, assume.
That's a budget issue. There's some ideas that we have on reforming the procurement process and how we can speed up some of that. And I think that you'll see some bills introduced or that may have already been introduced to help improve that process. But at the end of the day, we have to continue to grow our infrastructure. As someone who went and watched the South Carolina Gamecocks play in Orlando at the Citrus Bowl and spent 4 hours and 10 minutes trying to get out of South Carolina on I-95, I sure hope we start widening I-95 sometime soon.
All right, that's
Everybody
House
coming
Speaker
out, I
Murrell
think we're gonna
Smith.
agree.
Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
An indelible memory right there.
Yeah.
We're still going to roll for the podcast really quick. We have a quick lightning round for you. I know a lot of people probably have this question in the audience, but medical marijuana died in 2022 in the House, and it hasn't been back since. It's something that came over from the Senate. Tom Davis is always big on. Do you see that coming out this year?
I don't see that coming out. I still don't think that there's the votes in the House for that. It's in committee, and certainly if the committee wants to pass it, it can be passed out, and we can take the vote on the floor. But I just have not seen where there's evidence that there's a broad swath of support for medical marijuana in the House.
You kind of touched on this when you were discussing your responsibilities as Speaker, but what is the hardest part, outside of wearing the purple robe, about your job?
Committee assignments. I think committee assignments is what you struggle, because everybody wants to be on a committee and you got to disappoint people, but you know, I've learned that you're gonna have to be forthright, and you got to make decisions, and you got to work with your committee chairman and and explain to people why you can't assign them to the committee. But that's always that's the biggest struggle I have every year for the last 2 times, is come in and decide who's going to what committee and have people who are disappointed about it.
Out of the House and the Senate, who is your best friend out of those chambers?
Outside the House.
Actually, in the House and in the Senate, which would you pick? Who was your best friend in both those chambers?
Would you, yeah.
Yeah. Out of all of them, out of 170 people, who's your best friend?
So you're trying to make 169 enemies for me.
Just like Tommy Pope.
Here, we'll ask you a much easier question. Are you? There's a lot of we're hearing a lot of chatter early about people running for governor in 2026. Are you going to be one of them?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Any higher office?
Absolutely not. I love serving in the House, and I've had opportunities to run for the Senate, and I think the House is a great institution, and I'm honored to be where I am right now.
2 more quick questions. Is Sumter part of the PD?
But
As
being born in Florence, I say Sumter is part of the PD. Some would argue with me, but when I became Ways and Means Chairman and now Speaker, now they all of a sudden saying Sumter is in the PD. But also the Midlands is trying to claim us too.
I worked in Florence for 4 years and I never claimed Sumter, so.
That's your loss.
Something that we've learned about you is that you know what gas station where you can buy the best ice cream. So tell us, for those folks who are on the road, doing some road trips maybe this year, best gas station to get a quick bite on the road.
Well, obviously Buc-ee's is my favorite place, and I spent an hour in Buc-ee's on the way back from Florida. I was stopping in the one in Daytona Beach. But I love the QTs, and I am now proficient on how to order on a computer and get my ice cream cone, and they make the best egg rolls I can get, so I get that. My wife gets the grilled cheese, and so that is a must-stop every time I get on the interstate, and I look for the QT. And
It's quality. I mean, yeah, the fried chicken there too. Yeah. It's Spinks. I'm a Spinks guy, so I'll take that. House Speaker Smith, thank you so much. We appreciate your time, and we're going to continue our live taping, but he's going to jet out of here, and we're going to take some questions from the audience. So hang tight, and we're going to see you in the house.
all right, thank you for having me.
Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
And AT's going to take your mic off.
He's going to come take your mic off real quick. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let's just sit here, and everyone can watch us get our
Yeah.
pictures taken. Okay.
We're all kind of doing this
I know.
gray thing.
Well, that's what
It was not coordinated.
Yeah, we didn't discuss this.
All right, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. One more time, 1, 2, 3, and one last time, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
so
appreciate it.
much.
Yep, absolutely.
And AT's going to unplug you there.
Thank you.
Got it. Perfect. All right, I'm gonna go watch football.
You can,
When
around
we
this
planned
way.
this, I was like,
When I realized it was Thursday, I was, oh shit.
and we're still live on YouTube. To all of our friends in the state and around the world. So we did ask.
Thank you.
We need a mic. We did ask everyone. Thank you. Wants to be our gopher. Yeah, I know everyone, you were asked to submit questions when you registered, but no one gave me that list of questions, so I don't have them. So if you remember what you asked, we can run around. We have about, it's a little bit after 7 right now, so we'll go for maybe 10 or so minutes, and we can mingle around a little bit afterwards. Aha! Thank you, Lee. Never mind.
we got it.
Oh, someone asked about socks and loafers. It's cold out there, folks. I wish we would have had some of these earlier. We could have asked him about it. Someone asked about expanding abortion care access in the state. I did ask Senator Shane Massey, Senate Majority Leader, about that on This Week in South Carolina. I'm not going to tell you the answer. You have to watch the show tomorrow night. Hate crimes bill, it sounds like the House will probably pass one of those. We didn't ask him about that, but it sounds like that will go through the House because it has passed the House before. What happens in the Senate is going to be up to them, though it is the 10-year anniversary of the Massacre at Mother Emanuel, so that could be something that we see in play. Recreational marijuana, you just heard him talking about medical marijuana, so recreational would be a stretch there.
And I think it's important to add, too, on the debate that it's a brand new, when medical marijuana came up on the floor last time, it was a completely different committee that it came up on, and it came out of, and I mean that in the sense of the membership. It was the only Democratic-run, controlled committee. This is a very different committee now. It is controlled by a Republican. It's a much more conservative committee, and so it's harder for it to also get out of committee. So that changes the dynamics.
Yeah, there's a question of posting 10 commandments in classrooms, binary gender mandates, school chaplains. What is the likelihood of any such bill passing when we're talking about social issues? I was talking to Leader Massey about, if we're going to see abortion going through, like I just mentioned, and it sounds like they are really focused on their priorities, like you were hearing taxes, energy reforms, like some of these big ticket items that they really want to see move through. I don't know how big the appetite is for social issues right now, especially since everyone just got reelected. It's not an election year. It's not the hottest thing right now. And a lot of those hot button issues have been addressed in the past in some respects when it comes to these transgender issues.
I mean, I think we'll see a lot of effort through the budget. When you're watching the budget debate, most members are not sitting on the Ways and Means Committee or the Senate Finance Committee. They have an opportunity to offer up what's known as a proviso, a one-year law attached to the budget. You see a lot of these issues come up during that debate. But I will also add, you mentioned election year. We are gearing up for 2026 when we'll have people running for statewide office, governor. And we often see sometimes whoever is running for governor with their priorities matching what Republicans or matching what lawmakers, Republican or Democrat, want as well in the state house. So, some of that stuff usually comes up. I would say the budget is probably the biggest opportunity they have, but also we see a lot of that stuff come up during an election year. But I would also add a third thing, which is that, the Senate this year has 13 new members.
Yeah.
It's
9
become
Republicans, 4
right. It's become more conservative, and so will we see maybe some of those bills that have not been tolerated, maybe in the upper chamber in years past? Maybe we'll see a greater appetite for it there.
Yeah, especially since a lot of those new people came in with a mandate, replaced people who were a little bit more moderate. So that's all we pretty much have from right here. Someone said, how will South Carolina, the legislature, protect the VA from the Trump administration threat of closure? I mean, I think Murrell kind of talked about that a minute ago when it came to our cooperation or working with the federal government. I think South Carolina's in a pretty good position to pretty much kind of get what it wants or needs to, I guess, keep moving in some respects. I mean, especially when we're talking about offshore drilling, like we saw that carve out last go around. It's going to be the same thing this time too.
Yeah, I think especially, well, I was going to say, I think Republicans in D.C. understand the importance of not only the state, but the state's Republican voters in particular, since they do get usually, let's say, every 4 years. And so I do think you'll see probably a greater deference to what the Republican leaders, and like Gavin mentioned with offshore drilling, the governor, and we asked the governor about that earlier today, the governor and other Republicans were very adamant that the state's coast not be touched. And the governor told us today, if that requires him to send yet another letter, he will send another letter, and he is still opposed to offshore drilling off the state's coast.
So that being said, we'll take some questions from the audience. Sean has a microphone. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand. I can't tell you we have all the answers. I guess there's one in the back right there.
I had a question about the school bus privatization in South Carolina. Doesn't seem like a good idea to me offhand, but I don't know what the pros and cons are.
Don't know all the details. I know that we're a unique state because the state is over the fleet of buses, which has always been kind of an issue, especially when they were catching fire back a couple years ago.
I was going to say, the state has invested a lot of money and gotten money from settlements to get new school buses and put a lot of work and effort. I mean, I think that was like one of the first budget debates that I covered when I came to the state newspaper in Columbia. So, yeah, I'm not totally sure the right answer to that question, but I do think there's been such a great investment in new school buses that they feel pretty...
I mean, if anything, I could see them trying to push it to the districts versus the whole state, but that's a heavy lift. Any more questions? Yeah?
We've just gone through an interesting presidential cycle, and one of the big issues they kept talking about was the border, migrants, sanctuary cities. Where are we at in South Carolina with a lot of these issues?
Well, I was actually just reading through the budget again from last year that was passed the current fiscal year. We do have that immigration, the SLED put together an immigration unit to crack down on some of these things too. There's concerns about that. I wouldn't say that there's many legislative priorities when it comes to anything immigration related per se that I can think of.
I mean, I think it's probably something that, we talked a lot about the companies that are located here in South Carolina. We have a massive farming industry in this state that does rely on immigration in some form with employment. And so, look, from what I have also read, we haven't, again, this has not been an issue that I think a lot of state lawmakers have been beating the drum on in terms of like state-specific or district-specific legislation, because I think there's so many question marks of what happens that everybody doesn't want to get out ahead of something. But I have talked to Republican leaders who have kept in mind that their districts do include not only farming communities, but you have places like Edgefield that has a big, peach groves, or whatever the right terminology is for that. A lot of agriculture, right? And so I know that there is some kind of concern about maybe how that impacts, but I think a lot of folks, a lot of lawmakers that I've talked to and have asked that question of have just said it's kind of a wait to see. I do think that we will hear probably an uptick in terms of the conversation around immigration because of the fact that we are going to have such an open governor's race in 2026. I mean, people forget how long Henry McMaster has been governor for. He's about to be the longest serving governor, as we talked about.
Days, yeah.
And so when we get into that kind of a statewide race, I think you're going to hear a lot more. And that's maybe when we'll hear more.
It's also like the
policy
conflation of
decisions.
federal versus state, too. I mean, a lot of this is federal stuff that needs to be taken care of, and that's something that Lindsey Graham is going to try and do through the budget reconciliation process, which he's over since he's over the budget committee.
The one
So,
reconciliation, the
oh,
two?
the one, I mean, one big glorious bill, too. I mean, it's give or take, but I mean, it's a tricky process, but I think he's positioned to handle this, someone who's been big on immigration in the years past, someone who knows how the budget works. I think he's perfect place, perfect time for Lindsey Graham. So we'll be watching what's going on in Washington before we see maybe what trickles down to the states.
Yeah.
You got a question? Yes, sir? Yeah.
Can I stand up?
Sure.
Since we had a memorial for former President Jimmy Carter, do you think that all Americans should remember his countless achievements after he left the White House?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, today is also National Day of Mourning, which we did not recognize at the top of the show, but yes, most definitely. I think as a humanitarian Nobel Peace Prize winner, I mean, he did so much good in the White House and outside the White House, I would say.
And I'm a Georgia native. I'm from Atlanta originally, and though Plains is not close to where I technically grew up in Atlanta, I do, all the work that he has done, not just with Habitat for Humanity, but also within Atlanta. If you've never been to the Carter Center, it's amazing. And Plains is really cute as well, but the Carter Center is really amazing. And I was listening to some of the words that were spoken today. Andrew Young, the former mayor of Atlanta, spoke and talking about how it's kind of a surprise that somebody would come out of Plains, Georgia, and become a president. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think he did a lot of great work, and the work he did with Habitat. And we actually ran stuff on South Carolina Public Radio about, you can find that at southcarolinapublicradio.org, where people talked about their memories of him, and it's really, really touching. So I think he's had a very lasting impact on a lot of people.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know some recent graduates with advanced degrees that are having a really hard time staying here in South Carolina that got to go out of our state in order to find work. What is South Carolina doing to keep these graduates here? I've been hearing some disparaging information about what kind of innovation is coming here to South Carolina. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I would say the advanced manufacturing sector is probably the brightest spot when it comes to that. I think they're trying to make sure that we're not having a big brain drain. I know it's appetizing and appealing to go to places like Charlotte or Atlanta or like the Triangle in North Carolina. I think that's a huge challenge that they're trying to address more and more through infrastructure and investment. I really feel like we're elected officials right now. We need Murrell Smith back up here to answer these questions. Like, I'm not running for office, but yeah, I know what you mean. I think they're aware of that because that's what they're trying to, I think they've gotten some federal grants to help address some of these issues as well.
I think, and I'm kind of the rare, I guess, Atlanta person who came here and then wound up I hate to use the word stuck, but I'm here for life.
If we get Daniel Bone to stand up in the audience, please.
Yeah, but
I
you know,
came from Washington, and
yeah,
I love
yeah,
this state.
Yeah, no, I really, I love visiting Atlanta, not during rush hour. I
It's
love
always
living
rush
there.
hour, you know that.
But I think housing is a big issue, and you know, it's not. Housing is like, again, there's all these massive topics that we talk about that are just so hard to parse through, and housing is one of those. And you know, Senator Tom Davis, I know, has talked a lot about it. There was a former lawmaker in the House who was a big housing advocate, trying to figure out a way to make it more affordable, because you have a lot of younger people or parents of young families who are moving into areas that, you know, it's kind of interesting. When I didn't really live in an apartment in Atlanta, but I mean, you can find like cheaper rents than in some places than like living in Charleston, right? And even in Columbia, when I was looking for an apartment here, I was competing with all these college students in these high rises, or whatever Columbia's version of a high rise is. So I do think that housing is probably a big issue, and we've not seen a lot of movement toward it, but you know, with what Gavin was saying, I do think it is an issue that lawmakers are super aware of. It's something that I think the manufacturing community is very aware of. We're seeing when manufacturers are coming here, like, you know, name drop Scout, for example, but others do this. You know, they're having childcare centers. They're trying to find ways to keep people where it's more attractive than just, here's your job, you know, go home. But it's a great question, and I don't know exactly the
tech
answer.
clusters, getting funding for that, but also like redeveloping these downtowns and like the Greenvilles. And like I said, I lived in Florence for 4 years. You really have to create that place besides the Charlestons and the Greenvilles and the Columbias to keep people. Even people in Columbia are like, they're not crazy about Columbia. I love Columbia. Like, everyone else can move to the coast. They can move to the mountains. Like, keep Columbia cool. Like, we get the students out here when they leave in the summertime. It's no traffic. It's fine. But yeah, it's a multi-pronged approach, I'd say, too.
Yeah.
We're a smaller state that's growing, and we're growing, with older folks, too, but also younger folks at the same time.
Definitely is something I think, like, as we are doing our reporting at the State House, that we'll keep in mind and ask more about, because it's a great question.
Maybe one more question, guys?
We don't want to forget our live stream, so we're going to use the mic this time.
Sorry, everyone out there.
Those of us who've covered legislatures know that when you start a session, you spend a fair amount of time thinking about stuff that could be lurking in the weeds that you hope you don't have to deal with, but you might have to. In this session, what's lurking out there in the weeds?
Well,
I mean, like, again, we have so many freshman lawmakers, right? So we have a lot of new personalities in there. I think everyone's going to be trying to, I'm not saying that the leadership is trying, the House or Senate is trying to quash anyone from doing what they want to do, but there's a learning curve, I think, that some people are going to maybe recognize and deal with, but at the same time, there's some people that feel like those learning curves hold them back, or they want to express themselves and they're being held back. So I think it's going to be maybe just seeing how this group of freshmen affects things too, and how they feel they're being treated, and what comes out of that, at least.
I've sort of, on legislation, kind of stopped being surprised by what pops up and what doesn't. You know, we talked about the merging of those public health agencies, and I mean, that literally died on the floor with like 30 seconds left on the clock. And I thought for sure that thing was going through. I do think one thing to watch, and this is something that we sort of touched on with the speaker, is what occurs in the House related to these competing factions with the Freedom Caucus and the more traditional House GOP caucus. I mean, that relationship, which, you know, it's been kind of dicey on social media. They haven't really been together as one group beyond, you know, when they challenged the speaker, but is how they influence legislation. And they've been pushing a lot more conservative legislation, probably more aggressive legislation too, when it comes to things like tax cuts. So that's something, I mean, that's not so much in the weeds. I feel like it's probably out there. But in the weeds, well, I'll say this, as a former budget reporter, it was just like the best beat, because that's where all the policies, I mean, that's where, you know, the priorities, the spending priorities get done. And so I was even talking to a younger reporter about that today. Like, that's where I think everything's in the weeds, because it doesn't get covered as aggressively as it should. And that's
those,
where
yeah, those provisos crop in
yeah,
there too.
and that's where really important decisions are being made with your taxpayer dollars. So I just think, watching the budget, there's always some surprise in there. So I think that's probably the best, I don't know,
Yeah,
in the
I mean,
weeds.
it's not going to be medical marijuana. It's not going to be gambling. It's not going to be.
Well, yeah, we didn't touch on gambling.
I
We didn't
know.
touch on gambling.
Ask Joe Cunningham how that worked out. Well, we have to leave it there. But thank you, everyone. Thank you for these questions. We're going to be mingling around for a little bit longer after this. We appreciate you showing up here. Thank you, Maayan. Thank you, Speaker Smith. Special thanks to the ETV Endowment. If you're not a member yet, please consider becoming one. We would appreciate that, especially in this day and age, and of course to maintain this level of quality programming both on TV and radio for everyone across the state. We provide a very unique service, so we thank you for that. And this event was partially funded by American Amplified and the Rachel Giese Schechter Memorial Fund. We miss you and we love you, Rachel. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.